Today's reading was out of First Peter, the second chapter, and he talks about the fact that we live as free people. We as Americans, we love the fact that we are free, that we talk all the time about how we should be able to do that which we want to do as long as it doesn't harm someone else or it doesn't cause damage to something else. And so we should be free to act the way that we want to act or do the things that we want to do. Peter reminds us that as believers in Jesus Christ, what true freedom is. True freedom is living within God's guidelines. It's living the way that God desires for us to. And a lot of times we have this idea that constrains our freedom or that strangles our way of living to be free to do whatever we want. But when you think about it in terms of light and darkness, life and death, good and bad, when we live however we want, then we are subject to the elemental forces of this world, is what the scripture tells us. We are subject and slave to sin. And so therefore we find ourselves getting deeper and deeper and deeper into sin. And sin always costs more than we think it's going to. It always costs us more time. It always costs us more money. It also costs us more as far as our spiritual relationship with Christ. And so what God has done is that these guidelines that he's given us, he said, if you truly want to be free, if you truly want to live life of peace of mind, of love, of joy, of peace, this life where you're not shackled by that sin, you're not constrained by evil, then you live within his guidelines. And that's where the freedom is found for us. And so anytime we hear the fact that we have to live within guidelines or that we have to live within these boundaries, then we have this idea that, well, then we're not truly free, and that can cause bitterness in us. And I think that's what the second part of these verses were as well, when he talked about the fact that we're to honor all people, that we are to love God, that we are to honor the kings and the authorities that God has put over us. All those things, all those people that he talks about there are there to help us, and that we're to help them, and that we are to lift them up as God has placed them under his sovereign decree, that he would have them be a help to us. And so I hope that this week, as we are going through, once again, going through these verses and thinking about Scripture maybe in a little bit of a different way, that you'll meditate upon this. You'll meditate about the freedom that God has given you, and that you'll live in the freedom that God has provided. I hope that you have a great week, and I will see you next week.